Welcome to Container News's one-to-one interview. Today we're very privileged to be with Carl Bentzel from the Federal Maritime Commission. Welcome, Carl.
Nice to see you again, Nick. It's always a pleasure.
I'm going to start with a very strange question to you. Yesterday I spoke to one of your colleagues. He was quite happy to see changes happening politically. What difference is the new president to the Federal Maritime Commission and to shipping in general?
The Federal Maritime Commission is an independent agency, so We're not under the control of the federal government per se and the president. The president does have the choice of who would be the chairman, who would run the commission, and is entitled to nominate commissioners. Right. So traditionally, there's a split between both parties, and so the president will be entitled to add a new member to our board who would be a Democrat, and would be entitled to name who's going to be the chairman of the commission going forward.
Is that going to happen, do you think? Have you heard anything?
I would like to think that we were one of the first items on the agenda, but I tend to think that those decisions will rest a little further down. They have to get through the inauguration and do a few other things. So I hope it's in the near future, but you can't really tell you with any great faith that is actually going to happen immediately.
Okay, so I've seen that Joe Biden has been signing executive orders that you mentioned that there's other things on his mind. One of them is COVID, and that's been a problem, I think, for the shipping industry, and particularly ports. Is that not the case?
It is. It's been a challenge. I mean, actually, the maritime shipments have been vital to the United States in terms of sustaining, the business, the economic interest that we have right now. We're seeing a lot of surge of e-commerce. We're seeing household items, electronics, the purchase of all sorts of commodities that are necessary for us to do the things that we're doing at home, as opposed to traditionally being done in the workplace. And so we've seen surges of cargo that are almost overwhelming us in certain areas of the country. And we're now seeing an uptick of COVID infections, and that is straining the situation with respect to our ability to handle the cargo.
The International Chamber of Shipping has launched a campaign they've had the campaign for a while to accredit seafarers as key workers. But then now looking at making seafarers one of the first to get vaccinations. With that policy, or is that something is going to look at?
I've worked with my fellow commissioner, Commissioner Maffei, to write to the Maritime Administration and to CDC. The decision on how to allocate vaccinations in the United States is a state-by-state determination. So we wrote to the Maritime Administration, the CDC, the federal agencies in charge of our maritime shipping and also the vaccination and health and safety, pointing out that very point that these workers are critical to the supply of PPE and to the economy in general, and we need to treat them a little bit higher on the determination of who is going to get a vaccine. And so hopefully the industry has been working to make sure that not only are we focusing rapid response testing equipment so we can identify if there's an outbreak and respond to it as appropriately as we can, given given contact tracing and requirements to isolate. But also to get the vaccine to people who need to continue to work to provide what we need as a nation.
I think the last time we spoke, you suggested that some of the causes of the congestion at the major ports in the US has been the lack of staff due to COVID. That seems to be the executive director of Los Angeles. Also was on a webinar, a World Bank webinar, and he suggested that the digitization process would also help with cargo through the ports. And actually, LA is the only port that's going that's actually implementing the FAL Convention. What was brought into effect. Why is that?
It's difficult because there's so many different actors involved in maritime transportation in the United States. So a ship comes in, it's mostly a foreign flag vessel from a foreign country. You have marine terminal operators involved. You have the Port Authority itself. So they're usually landlord ports, and so the terminals actually handle the cargo. We have trucking companies that are used, railroad companies. We have equipment providers, so the actual chassis and containers are leased into service, and so all of these have to be balanced. And ultimately, we're going to have to get to a point where we communicate to a greater good, because right now we really have not been able to provide the transparency necessary, advance information about what the needs are going to be, and tried to coordinate the different elements. And so I think the determination on how we get to the next level of information technology and the exchange of information is going to be really important. And I think the port director, Gene Soroka, has been focused on how do we communicate better, how do we get information to the people that need to have it. So we're having problems with that right now, and I think we're on the cusp of getting some new implementation of technology that would help address it, but we're really not there at this point.
So one of the interesting things that happened today, actually, there was a report by the World Bank and the International Association of Ports and Harbours. And it said that only 1/3 of ports around the world had in fact implemented the FAL Convention. One of the things that's actually necessary to do that is to have a port management system. That needs to be something that everybody in the country uses and is stable. But it seems to me that America doesn't have. Would it fall to the FMC? Would it be to the federal government to create a port management system on a countrywide basis, or would it be individual states?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it actually gets back to our Constitution of the United States and port management. And our Constitution actually restricts the federal government from taking actions to discriminate any particular port. And so traditionally, we've allowed the management of the ports themselves to reside with the state. And that's delegated by the Constitution. That's one of the things that we felt as a nation when we established the country was important, to make sure that the federal government didn't control ports, and each state had the ability to utilize them as an economic driver. And so that said, the Federal Maritime Commission is actually federally authorized to allow the industry itself to come together under an agreement that we review that allows them to try to harmonize these sort of things. So we have authority to review private sector agreements where the state and parties to the maritime industry can get together and set up steps to harmonize and implement sort of a management structure that's more coordinated. So I don't think the federal government could per se take charge. I know that's different. For instance, I've visited Rotterdam, where there's a national control of the port policies. We cannot do that, but we can provide some tools so that the industry can work together to help coordinate that.
Next question relates to port management systems, and my understanding is that America doesn't have a single one, but the Federal Maritime Commission can initiate or create a system that everyone can use. Are you in the process of doing that?
No, we cannot do that per se. Under the U.S. Constitution, states are reserved the right to develop their own ports. It's something it's protected. The federal government can't favor any one particular port area, region, and that was intended to protect the state's rights to develop their own port facilities. What we can do at the Federal Maritime Commission is we have authority upon initiation from the private sector, from states, to allow them to cooperate under an agreement. This agreement is evaluated by our agency, and we determine whether or not we need to enjoin it in federal court because it's anti-competitive. So there is a process that we can use to allow the industry to try to harmonize, to coordinate, and there are some tools, but they have to be initiated by the private sector itself or the state port authorities themselves, maritime terminal operators or carriers. So we're different from other places where I know they have a more federalized approach, national approach to port policy.
And has any port approached you with the specific intent to create such a port?
You know, there's been many agreements that have been filed over time where they do things together. So, for instance, in LA, they have an agreement that allows them to implement the Pier Pass program, which is a program which allows night operations and tries to provide incentives to keep shipping going on at night to alleviate congestion in nearby communities. And so there's a wide range of these agreements in effect, commonly with respect to intermodal chassis, to allow the pooling of chassis and the utilization of that. So we're increasingly seeing more efforts in this area. And I think the results of congestion in LA, Long Beach that are occurring right now probably will provide some incentive to further do that. In fact, one of the agreements that we recently considered was an agreement to standardize digital communications and allow the implementation of blockchain technologies going forward. And so the commission reviewed that. A number of carriers came together and are in the process of establishing standards for digitalization.
So you mentioned the congestion, the ongoing congestion at the ports at the moment, and LA, Long Beach, and New York are probably the most critical of the US ports. And the Federal Maritime Commission initiated an investigation into the congestion at these ports and all of the shipping lines causing that congestion. Has that shifted on? Has there been any result from that investigation yet?
It's still going on. Fact finding 29. As a commission, we have independent commissioners, so we all have our views. So the views that I'm expressing today are mine, and what fact finding 29 was an action of the commission where we agreed to assign one of the commissioners the responsibility of collecting information, assessing the situation, making recommendations, interfacing with the industry, and that we recently, because of the issues of congestion, some of the issues that have arisen as a result of the problems of dealing essentially with COVID-19 and the unique characteristics that have emerged in the aftermath of that was expanded. So we're still in the process of collecting additional information and going through that fact-finding investigation.
By the shipping lines to reduce the number of containers available, to try and manipulate the market in a way that's beneficial to them?
Under existing agreements that are on file at the FMC, space sharing agreements, we essentially have three large alliances that operate in the United States trades. They comprise close to 90% of the total volume. We have evaluated these agreements. The agreements have provisions in them that allow the alliances to withdraw capacity in the event that market conditions generate a need to make reductions, and that's something that we considered while we evaluated the original agreements. And during COVID-19, the implementation, the initiation of those provisions to cancel certain voyages, blank sailings, as the industry will refer to them, was implemented through the agreement. We continued to monitor that process, and it was the reduction of capacity to address basically at the time reductions in trade of containers that range from 15 to 25% at each port. And so in the aftermath of the resumption of manufacturing in China and the additional cargo that was transportation need that was built up, there probably was a lag time in which we did not address affirmatively all of the requirements that would be necessary for a cargo reduction of 20 to 25% to a point where cargo had jumped 20 to 25%. And so there were some issues related to that, I believe, that were mostly attributable to the market itself. And so now, as we move forward, we're seeing huge cargo surges, and we've seen allegations that have been made, for instance, that we're not getting as much containers manufactured as we need from potentially from China. We're still behind on equipment that we need on the intermodal side at our ports, and rates are very high right now. We're seeing, in some instances, a quadrupling of the rates from the previous year. So we're looking at it, and we'll continue to look at those issues, and we'll have to look and see what the implications of those earlier cancellations of voyages were on the market to see if they were unreasonable.
What actions might you take?
Well, I think the question is, what sort of information do we get about the allegations? A lot of times we get allegations. I get a lot of emails, frustrations with one element or another related to the shipping practices, but you really have to have credible information that something that's occurred that's a violation that is in fact unreasonable. So you have to have good facts to take action, or in fact, some of the things that we do are just to signal the need to evaluate the practices and hope that the industry can correct them themselves. in general, challenge has been shipping has not been a lucrative industry. 8 out of the past 10 years, the container industry has lost money, and so there's a little bit of leeway in making a profit because of the history of the boom or bust nature of the market, and but we have to look and see whether or not we have information that there's been violations, that the actions have been unreasonable, and that that we need to take steps to remedy that, to penalize them or to fine them, and hope that the market itself will correct itself. But it's an ongoing process of collecting information.
Do you think rates are going to stay maybe not as high as they are now, but really high?
I'm hearing, frankly, that we're going to continue to see cargo surges in the United States. It's interesting that COVID-19, for instance, has been devastating to certain segments. Aviation is down 50% in terms of movement, but even with these substantial reductions occurring as a result of the cessation of manufacture in China for a couple of months, in the end, we probably will see a plus year. And we will certainly see in the next few months cargo surges that will be substantial. So I've not heard anything to lead me to believe that we're going to see a trough again. It's going very good, and there's enough cargo for the shipping lines to be very happy for the foreseeable future.
The shipping lines have done very well out of COVID. Anyway, what I mean is that they have managed the situation very well, and the shippers that I've spoken to and the forwarders that I've spoken to have felt very aggrieved that there's not a level playing field. Certainly in Europe, they believe that the consortia block exemption regulation has helped the lines to manipulate the market. Do you regret having, impose that block exemption or that exempt?
Well, we don't have a per se block exemption. We really authorize them to operate under agreements, so that we have to look at those agreements when they come in. So it's a little bit different in terms of the regulatory structure, and we are given the authority to continue to evaluate the competitive situation underneath the agreement itself, as we do. We have regular meetings where we participate and understand what the shipping lines are doing, and then we have authority to initiate penalties, actions to challenge unreasonable practices or unreasonable increases or refusals to deal. So we have authority under our statutes that I feel are adequate to challenge practices. The issue has been really that for a long time shipping costs are pretty low, and so it's difficult for us sometimes to mount a challenge that they're being unreasonable, given the historic overcapacity that sort of plagued the market. And right now, we're seeing a swing back. When I first started working on maritime shipping issues, it was the early 1990s, and the market share in the container market of the largest carriers at the time was less than 4%. And now we have much more concentration. We're at 15, 18% in terms of market leadership. And so it's changed a lot, and that means you need to be more vigorous in evaluating this.
That's kind of interesting. I wonder if the agricultural workers and exporters in the US feel the same way, that it's just swinging the other way. I mean, do you think the exporters in America would agree with you?
I think the exporters in America right now are having challenges as a result of the current structure of the market and the interest in the shipping world to get containers available for imports coming into the United States. And we are continuing to collect anecdotal evidence that we'll have to assess to evaluate whether or not they're actually refusing to provide service to U.S. Exporters and whether or not they're violating the statutory requirements to provide service. They are common carriers. We've recognized common carriage since 1876, I think, in the United States with railroads, and then to maritime in 1916. And so it's been a legal requirement. So we're looking at that, and I think there has been some information provided that the shipping lines, in their haste to get boxes to Asia for imports, have not been paying attention to their obligations to provide service for our exporters. And in some cases, it's challenging because we tend to be exporting bulk commodities, agricultural commodities, where you have a lower value proposition in their shipment, but they do have the requirements to provide service, and so we're looking at that right now.
There is evidence of some refusal to carry exports, to carry cargoes, in contravention of FMC regulations. Will we see some penalties?
I would say we're having allegations right now. So we have some allegations that have been made that that's what's occurring. I think we're in the process of independently trying to verify what actually occurred. So we're still in the process of checking the claims.
And from what you've seen, do you expect there to be some penalties?
I think it's too early to tell. We've gotten some allegations that this is not occurring. I think we need to independently check into these and make sure that they're credible and that they're accurate, and then you could look at taking the next step and see whether or not the law prohibits that. But the statute says you cannot unreasonably refuse to deal with a U.S. exporter, and so that's the standard. And so the allegations run from charging more to saying I'm trying to get containers back to China.
Fair enough.
So the question is one of reasonableness, and that's usually the case that we have at the FMC. So we'll continue to look at it, but I think it's too early to tell right now.
Okay, just changing tack slightly. Joe Biden was signing presidential orders, as we said. One of them was to rejoin the Paris Agreement, and the issues of decarbonisation around shipping now. Are you expecting to see America change tack as far as decarbonisation in shipping is concerned, or has there been a constant even throughout the era of Trump, who was not so interested in decarbonisation?
Right. So I definitely think that it will shift the focus to a much more aggressive posture on decarbonization. We get briefings from the industry in general, and they've initiated actions at the IMO, multilateral actions to try to stimulate research to get to carbon neutrality. There is whether or not we'll get to a point where they get to firm concrete targets for reduction in shipping, probably be resolved at the IMO level, or potentially even at a higher level in a different venue. And I think they'll be looking at that more aggressively. We also sort of have these issues related to our shoreside facilities, our port facilities. So states like California have implemented action plans on how to reduce reductions in carbon in the port environment. Frankly, right now, the technology isn't completely there. The resources haven't been completely there. You have many different parties to the maritime transportation chain that all contribute to carbon emissions. And so, some of them are drayage trucking, for instance. And how do you get incentives for a drayage truck driver who probably makes less than they should to start to get a new piece of equipment and an LNG truck? And so this has been a challenge, cold ironing vessels so that they can turn off their engines while they're in port, and using the port's power source, which would be renewable, or they still haven't developed that yet, and they're looking at it. So, but I definitely think there'll be an increased focus on how to try to address this issue from the prior administration.
The European Union's been quite aggressive in its decarbonisation plans. The latest, which came into being in the last autumn, they have the Green Deal, and they're looking at applying trading an emissions trading scheme to shipping and possibly to aviation as well. Is that something that you think America would applaud or follow suit with?
Yeah, it's a little bit outside my field of expertise, but we do have some regional trading emissions regimes. I think there's been some questions whether the market and carbon credits is really worked to provide incentive to invest in carbon reductions.
Yeah.
They're also looking at whether or not there should be a carbon tax, just a price paid. I think that in the United States, while the focus is going to be more aggressive, there's still a lot of questions about either mechanisms that are available and how you would implement them, and technology issues. So we have been more aggressive, and I think this administration is going to invest in technology. So can we overcome the challenges that we have, for instance, with renewable energies on storage, so that they could be used for greater volume purposes, and so these are all predicated on technology. And then when we get to the point where we feel the technology's sufficient, what sort of regulatory structure is going to be employed. But I think there'll be a definite focus on whether or not they can do that.
So I know one of the issues that you've been looking at to try and help with the emissions problem from shipping is looking at inland shipping in the US. And tell us a little bit about where you've got to with that process.
Yeah, I think this is more of a personal interest. The FMC does not promote shipping per se. We regulate shipping. But I did note that in Europe, there's been aggressive actions to support inland shipping of containers, container on barge services. I've seen recently that the port of Rotterdam, that 30 or 40 or 50% of its cargo goes into the port and goes out on container on barge services. In the United States, we really haven't been as successful as recognizing that. So hopefully the industry will start to look at ways that the inland waterway system could be used for the transshipment of international cargoes on barges, on our barge system, our existing barge system. And I note that the industry has, at the FMC, the ability to come together to try to harmonize practices, and these are like exchange of equipment, and that really doesn't exist in our inland market right now. And so the hope is moving forward, we can try to copy what the Europeans and have done successfully in using inland shipping to a greater extent for containers. And it is a preferable way from decarbonization because of the amount of cargo that can be shifted from trucking or rail to a much cleaner maritime movement. So there should be some incentives for our country to invest in it, and there's some mechanisms that the industry could use to help facilitate it, to harmonize it in the United States. But we're still in the infancy of looking at that system.
And has the industry itself come back to you and said it would like to, the inland shipping industry, such as it is in America at the moment, has that industry come back to you and said, we are interested in developing this?
I think our inland industry has traditionally been structured to transport bulk commodities, agricultural, petroleum, and so it's developed more on a proprietary basis, that you have contracts between large scale exporters of agricultural products and the barge company itself. So it's not structured right now similar to what we have, for instance, in international container shipping, where standards are set up, where there's transparency in the services that are going to be provided. Everyone knows what exchange can be done with respect to the use of joint equipment. And so they're interested because it would be all new business for them. And so we've had some discussions with the associations, and there's real interest. But I think we're still pretty far away, and we should be looking at what's occurred in different places in the world to stimulate this, and what challenges that we could overcome to utilize our existing inland system to a greater extent.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for your time, Carl Bentzel. It's been a pleasure speaking to you again, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you very much for your time.
Nice to talk again, Nick, and be safe.
And you.